I'm Emily. I'm 29 years old. A designer. And the oldest of two daughters. I live a pretty quiet life in Portland. Spend too much time sketching. And drink way too much coffee. If you met me, you'd probably think I had it all together, but today, I'm going to tell you about the moment I realized I never really belonged in my own family. My little sister Haley got married last Saturday. It was one of those picture-perfect weddings. The kind you'd see in a bridal magazine. An outdoor garden venue in the hills of Oregon. White chairs under string lights. And every guest dressed like they walked out of a catalog. I was invited. Of course. But I wasn't really included. I felt it. The second I stepped onto that lawn, it wasn't just the seating arrangement or the polite but distant hugs. It was this quiet, unspoken message that I was an extra in someone else's story. Growing up, I always knew Haley was the favorite. She was the golden girl. The one with straight A's and the effortless charm. The one my mom bragged about at dinner parties. And me, I was the one who helped set the table and then disappeared. I never resented her for it. At least, I didn't think I did. I told myself that some families just work that way. That as long as I did well in my own corner of the world, it didn't matter who got the spotlight. But something changed at that wedding. I wish I could say it was one specific moment. One cruel sentence that woke me up. The truth is, it was a series of small things. A smile that didn't reach someone's eyes. A chair placed just out of the frame. A silence that filled more space than any words could. And I think that's what hurt the most. Not being left out. But knowing I was never meant to be included. The driveway was lined with lavender and baby's breath. The house was this sprawling, white-painted thing with ivy trailing down one side and a little wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Forever." For a second, I just stood there, holding the hem of my dress and staring at it like maybe, if I looked long enough, I'd feel something like belonging. A young woman in black greeted me at the front. She was holding a tablet and a stack of place cards. She smiled, polite and quick, and asked for my name. When I said it, she paused, scrolled, then handed me a card that read Table 19 in cursive gold. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured maybe it was near the back but still somewhere normal. It wasn't until I walked past tables with numbers in single digits 3. Woo. 7, that I realized how far mine was. I kept walking. Then I saw it. A small round table near the patio doors. Right next to a giant exit sign. The chair creaked when I sat down. There was a draft from the door. And the nearest other guest was at least 10 feet away. No flowers. No name cards. No centerpiece like the other tables. Just a lone votive candle flickering like it didn't want to be there either. I looked around to see if maybe someone had made a mistake. Maybe I'd accidentally taken a staff seat or a backup table they forgot to remove. I stood up, made my way toward the main tent, and spotted my mom in a long champagne-colored gown, talking to 2 other women. I waved. She saw me. I know she did. Because her smile dropped for just a second before she turned back to her conversation. I waited for her to come over. She didn't. A few minutes later, I saw my dad by the open bar. He was talking to the groom's uncle. I walked over, trying to sound casual, and asked if they knew how the tables were arranged. He said he wasn't sure, and turned back to his drink. Then came Haley. She looked beautiful. Of course. That effortless kind of glow that only exists in expensive lighting and family pride. Her dress sparkled in the sun like it had its own spotlight. When she saw me, she smiled, but not the warm, sister kind of smile. It was the kind you give when you win something and want everyone else to know they lost. She didn't hug me. She just tilted her head slightly and said something about me being early. I told her where I was seated, hoping maybe she'd say that was wrong. That she'd fix it. She glanced toward the patio and nodded, like it made perfect sense. I said it was pretty far from the main tables. She laughed softly and said, almost playfully, that at least I had a great view of the backyard. Then she touched my arm, the way people do when they want to look kind for the cameras, and walked away. The ceremony started a few minutes later. Everyone took their seats. Mine was still by the exit. I watched as the bridal party walked down the aisle, all coordinated in soft greens and pale pinks. They looked like a magazine spread. I looked like the extra, who wandered into the shot. I kept telling myself not to make a scene. Not today. I kept hearing my mom's voice in my head. The one she used whenever I got too loud or too emotional. Don't make this about you, Emily. But it was hard not to feel like I was already invisible. Like the message was loud and clear, even if no one said it out loud. You don't belong at the front. You don't belong at the center. You belong by the door close enough to be counted, but far enough to forget. As the vows started, I sat there in silence, fingers clasped tightly in my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't want to give anyone that. But something inside me started to crack. Just slightly. Because this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. A message, wrapped in silk and flowers, that said, know your place. I think the first time I noticed it, I was maybe 7. Haley had just turned 5. And my parents threw her this huge birthday party in our backyard. There were ponies, a magician, matching cupcakes, and a banner with her name in glitter that stretched from fence to fence. 2 months later, when my birthday came around, we stayed inside. My mom baked a cake from a box. It was chocolate with no frosting, and the only candle was one she pulled from a drawer that still had wax from last year. She said she was too tired from work to plan anything big and that birthdays weren't everything. I didn't ask for much. I remember cleaning my room without being told, setting the table, even coloring a picture for her that said "Best Mom" in big block letters. She smiled, thanked me, and placed it on the fridge for a week before replacing it with Haley's honor roll certificate from pre-K. It wasn't like I was a bad kid. I got good grades. Didn't cause trouble. I read a lot, mostly by myself, and made art out of anything I could find: old cereal boxes, paper towels, crumpled receipts. But no one really noticed. No one came into my room just to ask what I was working on. Haley, on the other hand, could dance around in a paper crown and get a standing ovation. She once spilled orange juice on my science fair project. And when I got upset, my mom told me not to overreact. She's just a kid, she said, as if I wasn't one too. There was this one afternoon when I was 10. I had drawn this huge picture of a treehouse, detailed with ladders, furniture, even tiny little light switches. I showed it to my dad while he was watching the news. He said it was nice without really looking. I left it on the coffee table. The next day it was gone. I found it folded in half under a pile of coupons. Little things. Always little things. Like when Haley got a new dress for the school recital, and I was told to wear what I already had. Or when she got to pick the family movie night every week. Or when we both got sick one winter and I was told to tough it out while Haley stayed home from school for 3 days with soup and cartoons. I used to think if I could just be better, just try harder, maybe I'd earn what she got so easily. So I stayed quiet. I helped out. I got awards, won contests, kept everything neat. I kept waiting for someone to say, "I see you," but no one ever did. It wasn't that they didn't love me. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. It was just that Haley shined brighter in their eyes. And no matter how hard I tried, I was always in the shadow. Years went by like that. Holidays, school plays, graduations. I was always there, smiling, standing just off to the side, being the supportive older sister, being the one who didn't need anything. So no one thought to give it. By the time I moved out for college, I had mastered the art of not expecting too much. I'd send updates, pictures of my work, my apartment, my dog. They'd say, "That's nice," or "Glad you're doing well." and then pivot to Haley's new boyfriend or her internship, or how cute she looked in that new photo. Sometimes I wonder if they even noticed how far away I was getting. How slowly I pulled back. Step by quiet step. Not to punish them, just to protect whatever small part of me still needed to feel enough. And then, all these years later, I show up at her wedding, and they sit me by the exit, as if that's where I've always belonged. On my way out. Quiet. Unseen. Easy to forget. I kept telling myself it was just a mistake. A mix-up in the seating chart. Something that would be fixed once someone noticed. But as the minutes passed, and no one came, and no one looked over, the truth started to settle like dust in my chest. This wasn't an oversight. It was a message. One carefully written without words. Delivered through placement and silence, and that stupid little number on the card. I watched as guests arrived and were greeted like royalty. Haley's college friends were hugged, kissed on the cheek, handed champagne before their heels even hit the grass. Our cousins from out of town were ushered straight to the front tables, right under the fairy lights. No one came to me. I stood near the drink station for a bit, hoping to catch someone's eye, to start a normal conversation, maybe just feel like I was part of something. But people passed like I wasn't there. Even the photographer looked right past me, as if she'd been told exactly which faces mattered. After the ceremony, I found my mother near the dessert tent. She was holding a glass of sparkling wine, laughing with a woman I didn't recognize. When the conversation ended, I stepped in, trying not to sound upset. I asked if the seating arrangement had been intentional. She looked at me with a kind of cold politeness, the kind that dresses itself as grace, but cuts just as deep. Her voice was low, calm, as she said, "You should know your place by now." Then she adjusted her earring and looked past me, like I wasn't part of the scenery. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. I just stared at her, waiting for her to realize how cruel that sounded. But she didn't blink. She didn't backtrack. She just smiled at a passing guest and walked away. Haley found me a few minutes later near the side garden. She was holding her dress up slightly so it wouldn't drag on the grass. Her veil pinned perfectly in place. When I brought up the seating again, she gave a soft laugh and said, I was being sensitive. She told me I was still invited, that I still had a plate, a seat, a name on the guest list, as if the bare minimum counted as kindness, as if I should be grateful not to be left out entirely. I asked her why. Why seat me by the exit? Why ignore me all day? She shrugged. Said something about logistics and table flow. But her eyes didn't match her words. They were sharp and smug and far too pleased for someone who was supposedly innocent. Then she said something that stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. She said, "You're lucky. I even let you come." And then she smiled. Wide and clean. Like someone posing for a photo. And turned to walk back toward the tent. I stood there for a long time after that. The sun was beginning to lower, casting gold over the lawn. And everything looked perfect. But nothing felt perfect. Everything inside me ached with the kind of tired you don't get from walking or standing or travel. It was the ache of being told, over and over, without words, that you don't belong. That's when I noticed her. Celeste. She was standing maybe 20 feet away, near a cluster of hydrangeas. One hand holding a glass, the other resting gently on her clutch. She hadn't moved. She wasn't pretending not to see. Her eyes were on me. Soft. Thoughtful. Too steady to be casual. She had heard it. I knew she had. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. She gave me the smallest nod. Just enough to say, "I see you." And in that moment, something shifted. Because someone finally did. I don't know how long she had been standing there. Maybe since the conversation started. Maybe even before that. Quietly watching from the edge of the garden, like someone trying not to interrupt, but also not looking away. Celeste wasn't dressed like the rest of them. Her gown was simple but elegant. navy blue with silver embroidery on the sleeves. Her hair was pulled back in a low twist, and there was something grounded about her presence. Like she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. When our eyes met, I expected her to look away. Most people do when they catch something they weren't supposed to see. But she didn't. She held my gaze. Just long enough for me to feel it land somewhere deeper than politeness. She didn't speak. Not then. She didn't ask if I was okay or pretend she hadn't heard what Haley said. But something in her face shifted. Just slightly. A soft furrow in her brow. A tightening around the corner of her mouth. Recognition. She knew. There was a calmness to her that unnerved me at first. Like she had seen this kind of thing before. Like she was measuring every word. Every glance. Every silence and finding truth between them. She watched as my mother walked away without apology. She watched Haley toss her hair over her shoulder like the moment didn't matter. And then she looked at me again. Eyes steady. And something inside me settled. Just for a second. It wasn't comfort exactly. It was more like acknowledgement. Quiet. Subtle. But real. I moved back toward the patio. Unsure of what to do with myself. My hands kept folding and unfolding the napkin I'd picked up without noticing. Behind me. The music played. Soft classical strings blending into the chatter of clinking glasses and small talk. Celeste followed at a distance. Not in a way that felt intrusive, but in a way that let me know she hadn't forgotten. She stood by a small table near the dessert cart, watching her son speak with the officiant. Her posture was perfect. Composed. But her eyes kept drifting back to me. There are moments you don't understand until much later. Small details. A pause that lasts half a second too long. A glance that doesn't match a smile. The way someone chooses silence when they could have filled it. I think that was one of those moments. She didn't have to say anything. Her presence said enough. That someone had seen the whole thing. That someone noticed the parts no one else cared to. And even if nothing came of it, even if the night ended just like it began, I wouldn't forget that she was there. That when everything else was trying to make me feel invisible, one person didn't look away. I was standing near the edge of the tent, pretending to look at the dessert table when Brandon walked up beside me. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there. Hands in his pockets. Watching the guests laugh and move, like everything was perfect. He was wearing the kind of suit that looked tailored for a magazine cover. His boutonniere was slightly crooked. There was a bead of sweat at his temple. But his eyes were calm in a way that didn't match the rest of him. He said my name softly. Not like a stranger. Not like a brother-in-law either. More like someone who suddenly realized they needed to pay attention to something they'd ignored. I looked at him, unsure if I should smile or brace myself. He asked if we could talk for a second. I nodded and followed him to the side path near the arbor. It was quieter there. The music muffled. The laughter distant. A hummingbird buzzed near a row of flowers. Then darted off. He didn't waste time. He said he needed to ask me something. And he needed me to be honest. There was something in his voice that told me this wasn't about small talk. I stayed still. Not sure what he was leading to. Then he asked if Haley had ever said anything about him. Anything mean. His words weren't angry. More like careful. As if he was already afraid of what he might hear. I could feel the weight of it. Like we were both standing at the edge of something we couldn't unsee. I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my hands. Then back at him. I told him it depended on how much truth he wanted. I said sometimes people only ask questions when they already know the answer. His jaw tightened. But he didn't look away. He asked again. Not with his voice this time. But with his eyes. There was something breaking behind them. A kind of quiet panic. Like someone realizing the door they walked through might not lead where they thought. I didn't tell him everything. Not then. I told him that love isn't supposed to feel like a performance. That, if you constantly feel like you have to impress someone to keep their attention, maybe they're not looking at you the way you think. His face changed then. Not with surprise. But with recognition. like a puzzle piece falling into place. He asked me if I liked her. My sister. I told him I loved her because she was my sister. But sometimes love and like don't live in the same room. Sometimes they barely speak. He let out a short laugh. But it didn't reach his eyes. Then he went quiet again. He said he had seen a few things lately. Messages she tried to delete. Calls that ended when he walked into the room. Jokes she made that only made sense in certain company. He said it didn't sit right with him. But he kept brushing it off, because everyone told him weddings were stressful, and she was just tired. I didn't ask what the messages said. I didn't want him to say it out loud. He looked out toward the tent. Haley was smiling, sipping champagne, surrounded by people who only saw what she wanted them to see. I asked him if he was sure he was ready. He said he wasn't. Not completely. Then he asked me something I didn't expect. He asked if I thought she loved him for who he was. Not what he could give. I looked at him and, for the first time that day, I saw someone else who felt out of place. Someone quietly wondering if they were just a prop in someone else's fantasy. I didn't answer the question directly. I just said that if he had to ask me, then maybe he already knew. He didn't say much after that. Just nodded slowly and walked away. Back toward the tent. Back toward the lights and the music and the people who thought the day was still going exactly as planned. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Something had cracked. And the sound of it was just starting to echo. It was just after the first round of toasts when Celeste found Brandon. She didn't make a scene. No dramatic gestures. No raised voice. She simply touched his arm as he stepped away from a conversation. And he followed her without a word. They walked down a side path behind the tent. Away from the laughter and clinking glasses. There was a small sitting area by the rose garden. Quiet and tucked into the landscape like it wasn't meant to be found. She sat first, smoothing the skirt of her dress. Then opened her clutch. She didn't look angry. She looked tired in a way that felt older than the moment. She held her phone between both hands for a long second. Then passed it to him without speaking. The screen was already lit. A message thread open. At first, Brandon just glanced. Then his eyes froze. There were texts from Haley. Her name at the top. The exchange was with someone saved as Liv Stylist. And the conversation was 2 weeks old. The words were casual at first. Wedding talk. Hair and makeup times. Then they turned. She wrote that she was dreading having to sit through another dinner with Celeste, acting like she owned the family. She called her controlling. Exhausting. And then added a laughing emoji, with the words, Queen of Passive Aggression. She joked that Brandon still asked his mom for permission to breathe. Followed by another line calling him sweet but soft. Predictably. Easy to handle. He didn't blink for a while. Just scrolled. Slowly. As the text got meaner, she wrote about how she couldn't wait to have everything in her name so she wouldn't have to ask anymore. There was even a comment about the house Brandon's family helped them put a down payment on. She called it her starter estate, and said she'd renovate everything once she could kick the old money vibe out. His jaw clenched. Celeste stayed silent. She wasn't looking for a reaction. She just let him read. When he finally looked up, she met his eyes. And for a moment, neither of them moved. The party sounds in the distance seemed almost fake. Like they belonged to another day. Brandon asked how she got the messages. Her voice was steady. She said Liv forwarded them by mistake in a group text for scheduling. She hadn't meant to. But once Celeste saw what was written, she couldn't unread it. She waited. She watched. And now? She handed it to him because it wasn't hers to carry. He didn't say much. Just sat there, holding the phone like it was something burning slowly in his hands. He asked if she believed Haley loved him. Celeste didn't answer right away. She said she believed Haley loved the idea of him. What he brought? What he represented? But love the kind that lasts. The kind that builds doesn't talk like that behind your back. Brandon stared out at the trees. The sun was starting to dip, casting shadows long across the grass. He asked what he was supposed to do now. Celeste didn't tell him. She just said, "You already knew something was wrong. Now you know why it felt that way." Then she stood, gently smoothed her dress again, and walked back toward the crowd, leaving him there, sitting in silence, with everything he thought was beautiful, now cracked down the middle. The room was small and stuffy, a forgotten lounge, just off the main hall. Celeste stood by the window, phone still in hand, the screen facing everyone like silent evidence. The air thickened as the group gathered: my parents, Haley, Brandon, Celeste, and me. Celeste's voice was calm but firm as she laid out what she had discovered. She didn't need to repeat every nasty word. The phone told the story. The betrayal hung between us like a heavy curtain that no one wanted to pull back but couldn't ignore. My mother immediately started to defend Haley. She called it a misunderstanding, a silly mistake from stress and nerves. She painted Haley as the victim of overzealous friends who didn't understand her heart. I saw the desperation in her voice, the fear of losing control. But then my father spoke. His tone was sharp, colder than I'd ever heard. He told Diane to stop protecting a lie, that no amount of excuses could cover up betrayal like this. His words sliced through the room and settled over the silence that followed. Haley shifted uncomfortably. Her eyes darted between us, trying to find an ally. Brandon remained quiet, his face unreadable, but his hands clenched at his sides. The tension was almost electric. I took a step forward. For the first time, my voice was steady and clear. I told my mother that if she continued to choose blindness over truth, she wouldn't just lose me. She would lose everything that meant anything. The room went still. Even Haley seemed to pause, caught off guard by the strength behind my words. Celeste nodded at me once. It was enough a silent affirmation that I wasn't alone in this. The old dynamics shifted. The power balance in that room cracked open. The conversation didn't end with neat resolutions. There were no apologies or promises that night. Just raw, honest truths finally spoken out loud. For the first time, I felt like I had taken my place not as the invisible daughter but as someone who mattered. Brandon looked at me then, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. Haley's face was pale. My parents exchanged uneasy glances. The illusion that had held this family together for so long was breaking, and I was no longer willing to stand in the shadows. That night, the wedding felt less like a celebration and more like a reckoning. And as I stood there, I knew nothing would ever be the same. Brandon stepped into the center of the banquet hall. The crowd's chatter dimming as all eyes turned toward him. The anticipation was thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. People leaned forward, waiting for the usual vows, the promises, the smile that says everything is perfect. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a plain envelope. It was heavy and worn at the edges, like it had been carried around for a long time. There was no flourish, no dramatic build-up, just a slow, deliberate motion as he unfolded the paper inside. The room fell silent. No one breathed. It was like the air itself had been swallowed whole. The words on the page were clear and final, a signed declaration of annulment. Prepared weeks before today. Gasps rippled through the guests. A few people whispered, trying to make sense of what just happened. Haley's face turned pale, the confident smile slipping away like mist. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with shock. My father looked down, his jaw clenched tight, unable or unwilling to speak. Brandon held the paper up just enough for those nearest to see. His expression was calm, almost resolute. This wasn't about anger or revenge, it was about truth. About finally breaking free from a lie. The music stopped playing. The photographer lowered her camera. Even the waiters paused mid-step. All the carefully planned details of the day, the flowers, the food, the fancy dresses felt suddenly meaningless in that moment. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so loudly it filled the whole hall. Part of me wanted to scream, to run, to tell everyone this was wrong. But another part, the quiet part I had buried for years, felt a strange relief. This was the breaking point we all needed. Haley's voice cracked as she tried to protest. But no one heard her over the stunned silence. Brandon folded the paper and tucked it back into his jacket, as if closing a chapter he never wanted to open. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The guests didn't move for a long time. No one knew what to say or how to act. The perfect wedding was over. And in its place was something raw, messy, and real. I looked around at the faces, some shocked, some angry, some embarrassed, and realized this was the moment where everything changed. Where the truth, finally spoken, had shattered the illusion, and I was no longer invisible. Haley's voice cracked the silence as she screamed my name, blaming me for everything that went wrong. Her words were sharp and wild, throwing accusations like knives, trying to wound before she could be hurt. My mother stood between us, torn and uncertain. Caught in the middle of a family she no longer fully understood. For the first time, she didn't rush to Haley's defense. Instead, her eyes searched mine, a flicker of something unspoken passing between us. I could see the confusion in her face, the struggle to choose between the daughter she adored and the truth that had finally come crashing down. I stepped forward, every breath steady but filled with years of silence. My voice was soft, but there was no mistaking the strength behind it. I told Haley she had spent her whole youth chasing my mother's approval, trying to be seen and loved. Yet today, I was the one left invisible. The room grew still. The weight of my words hung heavy, grounding everyone in a moment that felt both like an ending and a beginning. Haley's anger faltered as she looked at me, maybe for the first time, really seeing who I was beyond the shadows. My mother's eyes glistened, tears brimming but held back. She took a step toward me, hesitated, then slowly nodded, as if acknowledging a painful truth she could no longer deny. No words were needed to fill the space between us. The silence spoke volumes. I felt a release, a letting go of the hurt I had carried alone for so long. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about finally claiming my place. Not in their eyes, but in my own. The tension in the room softened. Haley's voice quieted, replaced by a fragile calm that hinted at the possibility of healing, even if it felt far away. And as I looked around, I realized that sometimes breaking is the only way to start being whole again. I walked out without looking back. The night air was cool against my skin, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant rain. Every step felt lighter, like a weight I hadn't known I was carrying had finally lifted. No one called after me. No hands reached out to stop me. For the first time, I wasn't searching for approval or needing to explain myself. I was simply moving forward. The road stretched ahead, quiet and wide open. I didn't know where I was going. And for once, that didn't scare me. I just knew I was walking away from everything that had kept me small. It wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about freedom. Freedom to be seen, heard, and valued on my own terms. The stars began to peek through the clouds, soft and distant. I breathed in deeply, letting the cool night fill the spaces inside me that had long felt empty. With every step, I felt more whole. Sometimes healing isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as choosing yourself, choosing peace, and stepping into a future you create for no one but you. It had been a week since the wedding, and the phone kept ringing. Each time it buzzed on the kitchen counter, I felt a flicker of something old: hope, guilt, maybe regret, but I didn't answer. The calls came from familiar numbers, voices I once knew well. Now just echoes I wasn't ready to hear. Instead, I sat by the window, staring at the quiet street outside where leaves drifted slowly in the breeze. On the shelf beside me was a framed photo I'd almost forgotten about. It was an old picture of me and Haley as kids, arms wrapped around each other, smiles wide and innocent. I used to look at that photo and feel a pang, a reminder of what wasn't there anymore. But today, it just felt calm. Like the years between then and now had softened edges I thought would always be sharp. The light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows on the walls. I traced the outline of the frame with my fingers. Not because I wanted to hold on to the past, but because I was ready to let it rest. The photo wasn't a burden anymore. It was part of the story that shaped me. Healing isn't about fixing what's broken in other people. Sometimes it's about choosing peace for yourself. Even when apologies never come. I don't need their words to know who I am, or what I deserve. That week, I found a quiet strength in silence. I learned that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means making space for new beginnings. For light to fill the places darkness once held. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. If you've ever felt like you were the one left out, the one no one quite sees in your own family, I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes the hardest part is realizing that your worth isn't defined by where you sit or how loud your voice is heard. It's in the quiet moments you choose to stand up for yourself, to walk away, and to find peace on your own terms. I hope my story reminds you that it's okay to take that step. Even when it feels impossible, healing starts when we stop waiting for others to change and start believing in our own strength. You don't have to carry the weight of being unseen forever. If you feel ready, I invite you to share your story. Tell us about the times you felt invisible and how you found your way back. Together, we can build a space where being left out doesn't mean being alone. We can listen, support, and heal. Thank you for listening to mine. And remember, your light matters even if only one person sees it.